Rows in WP post meta table, which is, I guess you're all familiar with WordPress more or less, so hopefully it's not strange for you what these tables are. And we have more than 200 gigabytes of images. Likely we have more, but it's around 200, let's say. So it's like, as I said, one of the biggest news portals in Serbian region, also maybe one of the biggest standalone WordPress installations in the world, or in this part of the world. It's running on a custom-made WordPress theme, and we are using custom-made WordPress plugins. We are using WordPress engine for serving HTML pages and XML JSON content for mobile applications. So we use the WordPress also as a backend engine for mobile applications. We are running on a multiple custom-made server setup, obviously, and let's say 95% of the traffic goes to the main website, and we have some sub-websites which are separate WordPress instances, which are not that important, so I'm not going to talk about it, like this top speed and similar. Okay, so it all started back like in beginning at 2012, and we started at the Hetzner hosting company with just the two simple servers, like one for web server and PHP, and the other for the MySQL database. It's a typical setup how you start with two machines. Later, like some months before, as you can see on the slide, before 8 May 2013, we scaled and moved to our partner Mainstream, where we actually improved configuration. Like we had 4 servers, we have put MySQL master replication, and we had load balancers in front of it. Some later, we came to the more complex setup, where we had the load balancers, and we had Varnish cache in front of the Nginx servers, which were used for caching, because too much visits, it was very complicated to keep to keep good performances only with Nginx and PHP. And then in one moment, we separated static and dynamic cache. We did this for a single purpose, because you don't want to have, let's say, the same service serving this, because static cache is something that never changes. For example, if you have an image, this image URL or URI will just never change. So you can put really long expiration time for that cache. And on the other side, on the news, which are changing, like a home page, you need to have another set of caching servers which will have a smaller expiration time. So this is how we made the split. And then somewhat later, we just improved the configuration. As you can see, there were more of the front-end servers, there were more of caching servers, and there were stronger database servers with using SSDs. Okay, so something about WordPress which we learned and discovered on this 4 years journey is, of course, as you know, it's running on a LAMP or LAMP stack. It's like Linux, Apache, Nginx, MySQL, PHP. It's event-driven architecture, which means you can have actions and filters, and you can hook almost anything you want in the code. So it's very suitable for fast web development and let's say customization like themes, plugins, and so on. And I believe this is the main feature which made WordPress so popular. Okay, from FURPS point of view, what you can expect from my experience and my perspective is from functionality, it's pretty good, it's pretty secure when we are talking about the core engine. From the usability, it's also really good. although some responsiveness becomes an issue when you have large tables in MySQL, the backend, WP admin, can become really slow, and that's something you have to handle. When we talk about reliability, it's also reliable. There were no any major issues in the core engine, and the performance is something where actually, you know, it's something that WordPress is not really good at. Yeah, actually, you can expect it to work quite good for smaller blogs, but if you are about to make a bigger portal, you need to be very careful. There are a lot of workarounds. You will see later what kind of workarounds we have to do on this way, but out of the box, it won't do the job. I'm talking about, you must have on your mind that it's not just a website with a big number of visits in a moment. You have like 40 or 50 people who are logged in all the time and who are making news all the time, who are updating your database all the time. On another side, you have a lot of visitors who are, you know, doing something like browsing the website, searching, hitting the pages which are not in cache, and so on. And that is actually something that makes a problem. And then the third factor you combine is large tables in MySQL database. So three things: big number of visitors, big number of editors or people working during the day, and big number of data in the database. So it's a pretty bad combination to, you know, to have. Okay, supportability, I don't have to talk about it because we all know that the community is absolutely great. Okay, so when you're about to make a WordPress website, there are some major performance types and tricks which we learned on the way, which you should think about or consider. It is like, what will be the most visited page on your website? So it's likely it's going to be a home page, but you never know. You have to think about it carefully. How many MySQL queries will be executed to the server on the main or the most complex page? Now, just to back to the previous, what I have just said is people say, yeah, okay, we can have a lot of MySQL queries because there is a MySQL query cache. But when you have 40 people working all the time and updating drafts, or even worse, saving auto drafts, every time when something is saved to the table, the MySQL query cache is wiped. So that's something you have to be careful. You also need to make clear separation between static and dynamic content, as I said. So something where you can have a large expire headers, something which doesn't change in time at all, and something which needs to be changed sometimes very often. Image optimization and lossless compression. It's about if you're going to have a website with a lot of images and you have a lot of images on the home page, even a small improvement can mean saving a lot of your bandwidth or speeding up the website. Like if you have 30 or 40 images and you put some lossless compression and you have like improvement for let's say couple of kilobytes per image, the final improvement would be that your site would be easier for 200 kilobytes or 300 kilobytes. Now multiply that with a lot of new visitors who are coming each moment, and during the month you can get a lot of savings and you can get overall better performance. Especially if they're running from mobile devices, from some slower network connection like Edge or something like that. Okay, so another thing which you have to consider when you're talking about WordPress theme is how many thumbnails you're going to have. Usually from the experience, web designers come and they just make design as they like it, and sometimes they mix different images with different aspect ratios. Sometimes they put too many thumbnails. And that's something also which can be a later performance issue, as you will see. Data serialization in the database. Okay, so most plugins are storing additional information into the WP post meta table. So the problem is that if you have a lot of plugins, like you use advanced custom fields, how many of you have ever used this plugin, for example? Okay, not many, but in any case, you get a very different picture, because as your post table grow, for each post, plugin will create a couple of additional rows into the post meta table, which will lead to the big difference in the number of rows in VP post table and WP post meta table. Okay, and the last thing to consider is serving images from cookieless domain. Cookieless means like you have 40 images and you visit a WordPress website, and WordPress will set some cookie, which will be like, I don't know, 100 kilobytes, or it can go even higher, maybe up to 200 kilobytes. And this cookie is sent in every HTTP request header to the server for every image. Now, you imagine the website, somebody's opening a website from the mobile and is browsing like 100 pictures or 200 pictures, and each time this cookie is sent. So it's like 50 kilobytes per visit of completely unnecessary traffic. So this is something where you can really get cool improvement, especially that the fact is that we have this, that upload and download speeds are not the same. So you will save the visitors for uploading 40 kilobytes of data, which is not necessary at all. Okay, another thing you have to consider is, are you going to serve data inline or to fetch it dynamically with Ajax? Okay, so let's put on aside these SEO issues, because when you have a news website, you want crawlers to crawl as much as they can, and as far as I know, I think Google is still in experimental phase for parsing JavaScript and for, let's say, for indexing data from JSON, which is inlined in HTML. So from our experience, we came to the point that when you have a large number of rows in post table, generating JSON can be a really painful task. And if you put it inline, it's like for every single page which expire, you will have this JSON to be regenerated. So it's pretty straightforward. Like if you have a navigation made with JavaScript for the website, and you want these categories, subcategories, and everything to be in a JSON, it's much better to put it to be, let's say, dynamically loaded, because it will expire once in, let's say, 15 minutes, or you can put even higher expire header. It can never expire if you want. It's still better than generating this every time. Okay, file sizes you serve, you can always check on a Google Outer Insights the page speed for the, and you will have their good recommendations, like you need to pay attention to the CSS unused rules. I'm simply telling you this because we had an issue with one front-end developer a few years ago. The guy made 400 kilobytes CSS, and it was not the mobile-first approach. And when we, despite caching and expire headers and everything, and when we actually run audit on rules, it was like 70 or 80% were unused rules. So it was really big pain. On one side, you're trying to improve something for 10 kilobytes, and you're multiplying by number of users, and then you see a 400 kilobyte CSS. So it happens. Expire headers, I think, hopefully you all know what it is. It's actually the HTTP header, which you set on a resource, which is telling your browser for how long it will keep the file in cache. So for all images, we want it to be as long as possible, but we put it on 7 days, as it's the minimum recommendation by Google, so you get the better score. You can put it even higher. The only issue we have with this is that if somebody damaged the picture or do something which he or she is not supposed to do, it will need to delete it and to upload the file again with a different file name. So it's acceptable compromise. gzip compression support, okay, I don't have to tell you how important it is. That's maybe one of the most important things you need to have on your server. To be honest, I haven't been playing with shared hostings for a long time, but that's something you really need to have. Simply, the theory behind this is that it's faster to compress the content, send it over the network, and for the browser to uncompress it than to send uncompressed file. This is simply because gzip has very good compression ratio and it's very good with compressing ASCII files. So this is why it's really cool thing to do. Okay, another thing which is important is that you have MySQL InnoDB pool tuning. It's used for it's related to the database engine, how it will behave, and the size of the pool is actually size of the memory it will use for most of its operation, basically speaking. What happens also on shared hostings is that database grows, InnoDB pool remains slow, MySQL starts to use temporary tables on hard disk, and then you experience really MySQL slowdown, database slowdown. One of the important things also is W3 total cache, which did a really good job for us, but specifically page cache. There are some different ways to configure it, but that's something I'm going to skip right now as we are, it will be a separate topic. Okay. So, as I talked previously, WP post meta ratio and why it's important. What we had to do in one moment, we realized that we had like 800,000, or maybe it was less at the time, 500,000 rows in the WP post table, and we had about 8 million rows in WP post meta table because of the lot of number of plugins which were adding additional information. So what we had to do, and WordPress of course is doing joining in queries, and what we had to do was to somehow refactorize this. What we did, we took out the part of the database and we serialized all the data which we are not going to need in any kind of search. So for example, we had a plugin, I can't remember the name, which was like if featured image is going to be shown in a single page. And then it's like 2 lines only for that. Then we had some descriptions for galleries and so on. So at the end of the day, we made a PHP standalone script which was running through the database, serializing this. We changed this in the team, and finally we came to this number like 1 versus 2 ratio, which is much more acceptable. Like now, we have 800,000 lines and we have 2 million of lines in WP post meta. Okay. Also, when you follow recommended guidelines from the WordPress, the guidelines are made in a such way that you make a compatible WordPress theme, which means if core developers of the WordPress change some technology in the core engine, your theme should not be broken. And in a such sense, when you open any book for the WordPress, you will see that recommendation that you call the title. When you want to display the post title, you call function the title. The title will call function get the title, which will call the function get post by ID, which will then execute a MySQL query, and a lot of other pieces of the code. When you call the content in your WordPress theme, it will also execute another MySQL query and a lot of code, checking for hooks and everything. So what we came as a pretty good improvement here was to execute a WP query once, we fetch the post object once, and then we just, from the post object, we get the everything we need. Of course, there was one compromise. It's like we need to escape some attributes and special characters, because that's something which is done in previous functions. Okay, so the lessons we learned: it's a great blog platform. It's very cool CMS for corporate websites too. It's a great CMS platform from generic or specific news portal, and generally it's very good and probably the first choice for the website which has more reads than writes into the database. Okay, so this is actually how last year presentation was ended, and the hint which I gave was never use theme temp PHP, which you can find in a lot of WordPress themes. I don't know, at the end of the day, I don't know, I see there is really strict rules to publish any theme on any public theme market, like Theme Forest. And I see some teams still having theme temp PHP as the part of it. And it's a really horrible code, and I will explain you why and how we had to overcome some limitations of the WordPress and theme temp PHP. Okay, so one of the problems we hit was handling the large number of images, because Portal was growing up, and we moved from non-responsive theme to the responsive theme and so on. So for responsive theme, you will usually want to have multiple thumbnail sizes for every image resolution. Why? Because on a full HD monitor, you will serve maybe a full HD picture. And when you scale the browser, you will do something like a fluid grid scaling. So you will scale the image in browser. But after one breakpoint, you will want to display smaller image. And after maybe third breakpoint, you will want to have even smaller image. Why? Because if somebody is watching on some smaller device with a lower resolution, you don't want them to fetch full HD images and then to scale them all. So you need to have a couple of resolutions. You find out screen size and you serve specific image. So let's put approximately, but you will see later that we have a much more thumbnails. Let's say you have 5 image sizes, like for the breaking news, you have for some categories which you find important, you have some smaller, and you have maybe a fourth for the widgets area, but you will have, let's say, around 5. And for these images, or for most of these images, you will want to have at least 3 size of thumbnails smaller. I'm sorry. And then you came up very easily with 15 thumbnails per image. So let's say you're producing 300 posts per day. That's, I think, the average number for the Telegraf portal. For these 300 images which get uploaded, and usually gets more, don't forget about the galleries. It's usually that for one single news they upload like 25 pictures. But let's put it one on one, just to make an easier example. So for 300 images per day, okay, 300 images per day, and we generate 15 thumbnails for each of these images, so 100 files per day. So the large number of files in a single directory is slowing down file system a lot, in a meaning that default WordPress directory structure for the files is you have a year and you have a month. And now imagine if you have 4,500 images per day, you multiply by 10, it's 45,000, multiply by 3, it's like 120,000 files in a single directory. That's going to blow up any file system, not really any, but the most of you use, and that's going to blow up NFS if you're using it. Actually, NFS will die around 40,000 images per day. Okay, so what we needed to do, we need to make a different directory structure. We needed to separate it to include the day when the files are generated. Another issue is that changing WordPress theme becomes a very difficult task because of thumbnail regeneration. I think some of the guys, if you have ever worked like changing the WordPress theme, you probably faced this issue. Like you need to regenerate thumbnails to have a properly displayed image. You don't want stretched images, or you don't want to be site without images at all. The problem is that some of the most popular plugins, like thumbnails, which has more than 1 million active install, will absolutely not do the job for you. So you need some on-demand image generation, which needs to be fast and secure. Okay, I want to show you now in a WordPress media library. I don't know if you can, no, it's likely you can't see, but I predicted that. So what it says here, it's like 566,000 of images. It's currently in the media library. And you get the screenshot from the Regenerate Thumbnails plugin, and it shows average time like 2.5 seconds per image to regenerate thumbnails. And then we go further, and let's say this. We have a maintenance window from 2 o'clock to 0 a.m. It's like 6 hours. We multiply this with number of seconds in an hour, and we get 21,600 seconds. The math says 500,066 images multiplied by 2.5. We get 1,040,000 and let's say 400,000 seconds. When we divide this, it seems that we will need 16 days to change the WordPress theme, assuming linear performance, so that there will be no performance degradation. So we had no doubt that we need a dynamic thumbnail generation solution. We need it to be fast, secure, and on-demand image resizing. We were not happy with most of WordPress plugins which introduced this, simply because they either fake the post meta in the database, and they can generate any thumbnail you request, or they will written to the MySQL database. Now, where is the problem? We don't want, we all swipe, do swiping on mobile devices. Now imagine a lot of people entering the website and starting to swipe a lot. So it would absolutely kill, and each time they swipe with their finger, it's like generating and writing to the database the image sizes. Okay, so theme thumb, at that time it was used on many themes, so it was an option to investigate. Why you should not always take Stack Overflow as granted resource or Stack Exchange? It's just a post which says about that this plugin can be used, which is not the case. So why we gave up on theme thumb PHP? It will generate a thumbnail for any requested image size. It will cache that image to the disk and serve it later. Sounds good, but it's not actually. You can make a script which will call a wget or just fetch the image, which will have a suffix on the resolution side, like 300 x 201, 300 x 202, 300 x 203. So what would happen with the theme tab? It would start filling your disk space. So somebody can write a script and run it and wait for our disk space to fill. Even worse, some proxy servers are still configured, although it's very old, but it still exists, that when they see a question mark in the URI, they ignore expiration header. So each time the proxy would fetch, because there is a question mark in this theme thumb URL. So the worst case, images are served from disk cache and are still served by PHP process. So no matter that thumbnails are already cached, but they are served by PHP, which is very bad, which is CPU consuming. And another thing, usually theme tab is stretching images, and WordPress has its own algorithm. So, just a second. So theme tab CPU hog, I don't know if you can see, it's all on 100% when you try to deploy it, on 8 CPU cores, on 24 CPU cores, and so on. So the solution for handling large number of images was, the major was to develop our own image resizes and to put out the resize algorithm from the WordPress core engine so that it behaves the same way, and that will generate images on demand. So what we did, as most of you probably know about this typical Nginx configuration where you're handling, where you're routing, like the first line try file says if there is a file name or if there is a directory, it will try in this order, and finally it will route request to the index PHP. So what we did, we did something similar. We said if there is a file, JPG, as the URI, serve it. If there is not, forward this request to our own thumbnail generator. And we made some query string additionally just to make it inaccessible directly. So if somebody tries to call our thumbnail generator directly, it won't work because he doesn't know the secret hash. So only the web server can forward request to our PHP script. Okay, so it's a quick and dirty code, but still better than TeamTab. You can see this check at the beginning. You can see checking the execution time, image quality, memory limits, and so on. You can see it loads the configuration file, and these red functions are actually pulled out from the WordPress core engine. So they are completely standalone, and you have resizing images exactly as the WordPress algorithm works. The configuration file, these don't get confused. These are not WordPress functions. But what you do in order to make life easier, you just take from the functions PHP from your team and copy paste those lines. And these are actually lines which will, the resolutions which will be allowed to be created with our script. So what it happens is that actually image is served by the web server if the file exists. If it doesn't, it will ask our PHP, which is completely standalone. And image is generated only once. Okay. There are some issues when to avoid WordPress, but that was last year about disadvantages. And if you have any questions, thank you. Sorry for breaking time limit.
Any questions?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I didn't hear you very well, but what I heard was about squeezing the resources and serve it as once.
Is it better with this?
Yes, yes, better.
Sorry.
Okay.
So you mentioned that you have your own infrastructure for the whole project and that you are currently using the verification process for the JavaScript and CSS files.
We don't have our own infrastructure. We are using our partner Mainstream, but we made this infrastructure together.
So have you tried testing the HTTP2 protocol instead of using the verification and everything else?
No, not yet, to be honest. Okay, okay. Yeah, sure.
Why are you not using Redis or Memcache?
Actually, we do, but that would be a separate topic. It's related to the WT total cache. So we are using the page cache, which I mentioned, is actually stored in the Memcache at the moment.
And similar question, did you try MyISAM tables?
Not really.
Instead of the InnoDB?
No, not really, to be honest, but I don't think that's the way to go, simply because it's something which is, when you run the WordPress, you go by recommended database setup for the, as the core developers proposed. And my ISAMs are not transactional also, and they are also good when you have a lot of writes in the database with the same amount of data, which is not the case if you get the post content column into the MySQL database. So I don't think that would be a way to go, but Redis would be a way to go, certainly, instead of Memcache. Sorry, can you just pick up the mic?
Do you think you're approaching the limits of WordPress scaling, or you can just go solve it by problem, you can scale it even more? Or this is the maximum you can exploit from WordPress?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, actually, I think we are approaching some limit. It's not that it can't be scaled. It can be scaled even more because the bottleneck can be eliminated, most of the bottlenecks, even if we would have to implement our own sharding behind the, there are options like you can put WP query, you can connect it with Elastic. So there is always a way to scale it more. But the issues we are facing and which we don't like is the more and more people in our editors staff. So the people who are working the back end are experiencing a lot of problems. Why would we have them to use WP admin, okay, you can even write your own to connect directly to the MySQL, but then you're moving to almost your custom-made CMS. So it can be scaled even more, but it's not really a clear way to do it. It's more like quick fixes all the time. Okay, any other questions? Yeah?
You mentioned Elastic right now. What do you do with full text search or these kind of sites databases?
Yes, we use Elastic.
Second question about this serialization. Can you explain the number of editor? How do you make it compatible with plugins that you use for serialized data?
No, actually, we had to give up on most of the plugins. So I don't know, maybe we have 2 or 3 plugins. So we crossed the point where we need to develop our own plugins for anything we need and to consider performances carefully. Okay, thank you.